Welcome to Muskegon Musings, a new program designed to look at the cultural, social, and historical roots of Muskegon and Muskegon County, and we're going to be also exploring Western Michigan history. Join with me today is Kurt Troutman, a professor of history and political science at Muskegon Community College, and my name is George Maniotis. I am a professor of history at the college. To give you a little bit of background, I'm going to cut away to Kurt. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Kurt, and your background, because I think the audience would like to know about us.
I'm not from Muskegon. I was born in Detroit, but for the last 15 years, Muskegon has been my hometown. And I really look forward to this series, George, as far as introducing all of our cultural treasures here in Muskegon to the greater public. I've been privileged to teach up at Muskegon Community College for 15 years, political science and history, but it's going out to our museums, looking at the many institutions we have in Muskegon and sharing those. That's what I'm really excited about today. So I think we've got the makings of a great program here, George.
Right, and I'm also a transplant. I was born and raised in Chicago, came here in 2006, been around the country in many different places, but I've been always fascinated about learning about my local communities, any community I've lived in. And to that endeavor, we've run this center called the Center for Experiential Learning through Muskegon Community College. Kurt and I have worked to develop a series of lectures, programs, trips to engage the public in terms of not only Civil War and military history, but social history as well. We've done such things as the Gettysburg and Vicksburg trips. We've been to Chicago and Detroit a number of times for different cultural as well as historical venues. We have also been down as far as Chattanooga, Tennessee, to check out a Civil War battlefield there as well. So we really look forward to bringing through not only the television, MCC TV, but also a new YouTube channel, this format. And we're going to be looking forward to trying to develop a series for you. Today we're joined by a privileged guest, Alan Dake, who is the director of the Muskegon Heritage Museum. Alan, welcome.
Thank you.
Alan,
pleasure to have you guys here.
Great.
Well, we are really overwhelmed. We're sitting right in your living room, so to speak. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your museum and your mission? What are you supposed to do? What's the purpose of the Heritage
Well, the
Museum?
purpose of the museum is to show our visitors the industrial history of Muskegon. And in order to do that, you need a building. This building was built over 100 years ago. We don't know the exact date. And it was used as a boarding house originally. And it was renovated or started to be renovated in the 80s when we got our coreless valve steam engine, which is behind us. And they got that from the Stuart Hartshorn roller shade factory. And luckily it wasn't demolished during World War II, for scrap. And so we have that. And that kind of got the museum started. And since then, we've been working on developing the museum, getting more exhibits. My wife and I started here in 2009, and pretty much the second, third floor were all, bare wood, no electrical, anything. And we've hired the proper people to get all those things in place. And so we now have 3 floors, almost 10,000 square feet of exhibit space about the industries of Muskegon. And most people are really amazed to learn about violins made in Muskegon. Just so many other things besides, everybody knows about the Continental Motors and the engines they made, or Brunswick, but they're not familiar with so many other things that we have. We have almost 80 exhibits right now, and we'll have more next year. Because we're going to expand next year into another space.
Alan, we look at history as really a combination of his story and her story. And I think museums are just wonderful at setting up exhibits to tell stories. So for young people, particularly college-age students, they're involved in technology, they're looking forward. What is here at this museum to show young people their story of their history?
Well, you start when you come in the front door of the museum, for instance, Bennett Pump. We still make Bennett gas pumps here in Muskegon, but we've got gas pumps from the 30s. in our Bennett Pump exhibit. There's an adding machine from 1914 in the front room that tells about a company, Commonwealth Adding Machine Company, that was here in Muskegon. As you come into other parts of the museum, the Chase Hackley Piano Company was here. We have a Chase Hackley piano that was made in 1929, one of the last ones they made. It's a player piano, so we're able to do that, play that, for our visitors. We're about to get a Chase Brothers, which is before Hackley got involved in the company, grand piano, hopefully this week sometime. And it's in very good condition for its age, over 100 years old. We have a Brunswick bowling alley that works, so you can actually see how the pins are set and how the balls return, things like that. You go into the second floor, besides our big steam engine, which I'll come back to. Second floor has a lot of things made in Muskegon. Sealed power, Blakely outboards were made in Muskegon. We have a couple of those. So there are just so many things that are made in Muskegon. I mean, I could go on and on and on, Anaconda wire and cable and et cetera. But one of our feature items is we have a cordless valve steam engine that weighs 18 tons, and we run it all the time. And it's tied to leather belts that run machine tools in our machine shop. And it's really cool to see it. It's running in the background right now.
So this museum has many hands-on exhibits. It's not exactly a static museum.
Correct. We make springs. We have a spring making machine that was provided by Michigan Spring, and you can come and see those springs made. Take some with you. Well, in fact, usually this time of year we have a pretty good stack of them, because when the school kids are here, they like to take springs home with them, and so we're making them constantly with that. We have a woodworking exhibit where we can do hands-on, teach you how to saw, use a plane, things like that.
So talk to us about your staffing, your budget. How do you operate a place like this? Obviously, it takes a lot of work.
Well, it's all about the volunteers. I mean, really, nothing happens here without tremendous help from a lot of volunteers. We have about 80 volunteers total. We have 8 or 10 that come every Thursday all winter long. If we got to paint, make an exhibit, put up drywall, whatever it is, those guys come and help me on Thursdays. My wife has a staff that works in the office area to, take care of all the logistics, because everything that you get in, you want to have records for. And so they're all entered into a computer. So we have records for where they came from, any history, provenance on all of the things that you're able to acquire. And that's how we get most of the things for the museum, is somebody calls up and says, I've got such and such, are you interested? And usually we're interested. We'd like to see it. If it has something to do with Muskegon, we'd like to at least see it, and then we go from there. As far as funding, we get no funding from the state or the government or any local government of any kind. We get all of our funding from donations, door receipts. It's $5 to enter the museum, and we just depend on that for any kind of funding. We also, at the Community Foundation, have a Muskegon Heritage Museum fund that helps us pay for electricity, things like that. So the bulk of the money, or all of the money that's donated, goes into that fund and stays there. But then we get interest on it from the Community Foundation, and you're able to use that money for anything that you need, whether it's, to pay for a new floor somewhere, or, anything. That's what that money could be used for. So far, we've had real good luck with donations, and lots of people come in the museum, so we haven't touched that fund as far as taking any money out of it. And that's, we can build it, and that's what we want to do.
So clearly a community museum funded by our community.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
As I take my students upstairs to the second floor, I like to take them into the telephone exhibit because their lives revolve around their phones. Yet I can only keep them there for a moment because the very next exhibit is their absolute favorite, and that's Raggedy Ann. What can you tell us about Raggedy Ann here in Muskegon, particularly as many of us grew up with this? Young people did not. I'm amazed at how attracted they are to Raggedy Ann.
Well, I just happen to have our Raggedy Ann. Our Raggedy Ann was, this particular one was made here in 1918, and She was made at the factory down near. It's down near where the post office is now. In fact, there's a plaque down there, and it was the Non-Breakable Toy Company. And what happened was Johnny Gruelle, who wrote the book about Raggedy Ann, that's where it all started, went to Voland and Company in Chicago, and they wanted they were going to print the book, but they wanted something to go with it. And they thought a doll would be perfect to just put on the counter, not to sell to people. Voland came to Non-Breakable Toy Company and said, we need some dolls. So they started making them here, manufacturing. Well, then everybody wanted the dolls as well as the book. So they've turned out about 75,000 of them. They went on board ship, the Goodrich lines, took those dolls to Voland in Chicago, and that was until about 1926. After that, they started being made other places, as well as then Raggedy Andy was also made.
So Raggedy Ann turns 100 years old next year.
Well, actually, Raggedy Ann, she was made in 1918, but Raggedy Ann started in 1915. And so she's already 100 years old.
Looking good for her age.
But this one, will be 100 years old next year. Yep, she is looking good for her age, considering.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that always impresses me, and Kurt has also mentioned his students, but also impresses me is all the consumer products that were made in Muskegon, because we always think of Muskegon as being a hard grit industrial town, engines and metal casting and all this sort of thing. But I was amazed to see, like a bicycle upstairs, made out of fiberglass. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the button factory, which is still there, still on Sherman Boulevard. They called them the button factory because they made buttons out of milk with a formaldehyde mixture. Beyond that, I have no idea how you made buttons, but anyway, they made this plastic. They were able to make buttons. Eventually, they got into other products, and they were talked into trying out making this bicycle. So it is a fiberglass frame. There's almost no steel in it at all, just place for the seat and the wheels, things like that. And they made that frame in 1960. 1 year, it was $100 for the bike, and it was just way more money than you could go down and get a Schwinn for 25. So it was a lot of money. But it's spacey looking. It's called the Space Lander. And we have two of those bikes on display, and they are incredibly unique to have and quite valuable.
Yeah, they'd be kind of interesting to have today even. I'm surprised they haven't resurrected that design again.
There actually is a fella, I believe in New Hampshire, it's out east somewhere, that is making those. I think they're about $4,500 a piece. Probably fairly difficult to get, if you're willing to spend that kind of money, but it's a good looking replica.
Right. And other things that, not only just bicycles, but would you share some of the other things? You talked about a violin before, piano. What else?
Well, the piano factory was down at the paper mill, where everybody that's around Muskegon today knows the paper mill and stuff. The brick factory that's down there, that's still standing, one of the only buildings still standing, was the Chase Brothers piano factory. And so, like I say, we have we will have two of them shortly. A lot of other things that were made in Muskegon. You say violins. And one of our other musical instruments made in Muskegon, the Beebe son and father made about 1,000 Beebe violins. They were very highly thought of. People in Chicago wrote about how good they were, and so they're pretty special. And we're working with our orchestra here to maybe have some of those played at a venue at some point in the future. Not sure when that will really happen. Outboard motors made here in Muskegon. Blakely Outboard made outboard motors in 1950, 1960. There were cars made in Muskegon. Now, we don't have any samples of any of the cars. As far as we know, some of the cars don't exist anymore, but the Henry motor car was made in Muskegon. They made about 600 of them. Continental Motors sort of got into the car business. They made the Beacon was one of their cars, and the Lakeshore Museum has one of those cars on display at the museum. So, a lot of varied things, like you say. I mean, it's really amazing. All kinds of boating, fishing lures, and boating instruments that were made in Muskegon. boats made in Muskegon. The Racine Boat Company made everything from small kayaks and canoes right up to big yachts. They made light ships. They made tugboats. So it's really amazing. And then there was a company that made sport boats in the 60s, with outboard motors and things like that.
Walking through the museum, many things stick out right away. To me, what's most captivating is this massive tank engine sitting here in the museum. Tell us about that. What's Muskegon's tie to tank engines, and how did that end up here in the museum, please?
Well, the large tank engine you're speaking of was in a field, I don't remember just where, and it was donated to us, pretty rusty, and we had a volunteer again come in and spend about 120 hours by his account restoring it right here where it sits. 12-cylinder, air-cooled, used during World War II and after to power our tanks. It's a gasoline, air-cooled engine. Continental Motors. Continental Motors made so many engines way before that. They started down at the Racine Boat Company. They bought their foundry and then built engines there and started. And they got into the airplane engines. They made 4-cylinder and 7-cylinder radial engines that were used during World War II to train all of our pilots. So Continental Motors is an important part of Muskegon.
It certainly is. Alan, tell us about your background. How did you get involved in this museum?
Well, I was a teacher, and then I was a technology coordinator for the school district, and I retired in '98, and I was out of town on a ski trip, and during that ski trip there was a open house for this steam engine, and they just got it running for the first time in years and years, and I said, yeah, I'd like to see that steam engine. I build model stationary steam engines, and so I got a hold of some people, and because I missed the open house, and so I came in and we got talking, and well, what do you think of our museum? Well, that was a little difficult. It was all boarded up, but they had a lot of potential that I could see, and so I talked to a few people, and I said, I think I can help if you'd like some, and they said they would. So I got my wife, and she and I came in, and we drew up a plan of how layout of things, and just the rest is history, as they say. It's really amazing, the volunteers, what they've been able to accomplish here.
It takes quite a bit of effort to trace the history of some of these products. How do you go about finding out the history of some of these more obscure products?
Well, the first thing always, for me, is I get online. Because let's find out what there is online. And of course, no matter what you're looking for, you got to put it in 6 different ways to try and get all the information you can. As an example, my great-grandfather was the president of the Commonwealth Adding Machine Company. I had no idea, never heard of it. Till about 6 months ago, my cousin John sent me a picture of a newspaper article about the Commonwealth Adding Machine and our great-grandfather. And I'm like, really? So we start looking around, where can we find one? If you go on the internet, you can't necessarily find it there. You go to the Hackley Library, go to the Torrent House, and start looking through city directories and see what you can find. And you just keep looking and looking and asking. And in the case of the Commonwealth Adding Machine, Lakeshore Museum had one. Couldn't find one anywhere else. There was 2 in museums in Germany. Other than that, just non-existent. And they were... The Lakeshore Museum was kind enough to lend it to us for a period of time, so we have it on display as another item made in Muskegon.
So it's, in a way, you're like a detective. You're hot on the case, and you're looking for the clues, and things start adding up for you.
And that's a lot of fun. For me, it's a lot of fun. I don't enjoy looking through the microfiche on the newspaper. That gets in my eyes in about 15 minutes. And for a number of years, Tom Carlson from Muskegon liked to do that, and he helped us immensely with a lot of the research at first, because he liked to look for that stuff, and it was something that he enjoyed. He's been quite ill recently, so we haven't had his help for that.
So how do volunteers become involved? If someone wants to volunteer, are there specific skill sets they must possess? Is there an application? How does a person come down here and volunteer?
walk in the front door and says, I'd like to volunteer, and we'll take you, we'll train, whatever, and everybody does have different skill sets, but they're all usable. I mean, I take my Thursday group that comes all winter long. Everybody, I mean, I've got president of companies, I've got, all retired people. I got people who worked at the phone company and all. They're great people, and they're just willing to try anything. And that's really helpful. If you're willing to try anything, whether it's painting or, putting up drywall or designing an exhibit, doesn't matter. And then volunteers, as far as the museum and having the museum open, we do training sessions to train people, and we're always looking for more volunteers because right now we're open Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays, 11 to 4. We'd like to be open a few more days a week, but you need more volunteers. We ask people, if you're volunteering during the year, to volunteer for 6 days during the year, and if you want to do more, we're more than glad to have you do more. And then we have volunteers that actually have alarm codes and run the machinery and keep things oiled. That takes a little bit higher skill set, but anybody can learn it. It's not, as we say, it's not rocket science.
So clearly everyone can make a contribution.
Absolutely. Anyone and everyone can make a contribution. We've had college students volunteer. Usually they go on in their careers and aren't able to continue, and that's unfortunate because they move somewhere else or whatever, but we're glad to have anybody that would like to volunteer.
Why don't you give us your address and your phone number so people can get in touch with you or drop in on you?
Well, our physical address is 561 West Western Avenue, Muskegon 49440. The web address is Muskegon Heritage, all one word, muskegonheritage.org, and telephone number 722-1363. I don't dial that very often.
Yeah, I noticed. Well, we don't call ourselves usually.
Yeah.
So what's next? You talked about 80 exhibits here and more are coming. You've opened up a third floor. What can we see next in the next this upcoming season and beyond?
2 exhibits that we're already working on, because we have 2 ice boxes made by the Alaska Refrigerator. We felt one of our volunteers suggested that we do something on getting ice. How did they get ice? And most people don't know, and especially younger people, and they cut it out of the lakes. So Mona Lake Ice was one of several companies in Muskegon, and we have a number of artifacts from Mona Lake Ice Company, and we've acquired ice saws and other things. So that'll be one exhibit for sure that will kind of go along with the Alaska Refrigerator. We'll kind of put them side by side because ice and then into the refrigerator. We have quite a few other exhibits that we're working on. As we all know, the cob plant is being torn down, and we want to do a model of the cob plant and then talk about the history of consumers and the cob plant here in Muskegon.
So you've been in touch with them as the destruction's taking place
Absolutely.
to recover some of their items and
we
repurpose
really
them?
didn't recover a lot of items. I mean, if you think about, most of their things are gigantic. I mean, generators and turbines and things like that. But we have a number of, 200 or 300 photographs from the building and outside the building. We got help from Greg Johnson, who has helped us with other videos here. And we shot a complete video from coal into the building, crushed, the whole 9 yards. So we'll be able to show that in an exhibit. Because once the building's gone, it won't be there anymore. So we'll be able to show those kind of things in that exhibit. So we're expanding into the second floor of the front of our building starting in September. We'll start doing all the rework of the building and get that done.
So what's a direct message you might want to send to the people here in Muskegon as to why should they come down and visit us here at the museum?
Well, there's so many things to see that have to do with the history. If you've lived in Muskegon a while, if you have parents here, you grew up here, then your parents probably worked at Seal Power or Consumers or Lakey Foundry or Brunswick, Lift Tech, all of these, major companies in Muskegon, and you ought to see some of the things that your parents or grandparents, had a hand in building. And I think it's pretty special. The really neat thing is we get, as you know, we have 10 cruise ship visits into Muskegon this year, and this museum is a hit with the cruise ships. We get about 3/4 of the people that are on the cruise ship come through the museum, and they recommend back to the ship that people come again. Why? Because they recognize a lot of the things that are here, and it's interesting to see some of the history of, how they were built and where and when, all that kind of thing.
Well, Alan, thank you for joining us this morning. It's been a pleasure to be able to visit with you and sit in your living room, so to speak, and we encourage people to come down to the Heritage Museum and visit.